What happens when two bored soldiers decide to prank a sleeping woman and accidentally wake up a weapons system that's been armed for 24 years? Fort Campbell, Kentucky. August heat that made the asphalt shimmer. Building 6 Charlie, where an old air conditioning unit rattled and wheezed, pushing cool air into a break room that smelled like instant coffee and military staleness. This is where it happened. This is where two young men with a Sharpie and a smartphone learned that some reflexes never sleep, that some instincts never fade, that some women are far more dangerous than any man in the room. The woman on the couch looked harmless. That's what they thought. 48 years old, short blonde hair cut to regulation, civilian clothes hanging loose on a lean frame. She appeared to be sleeping, hands folded across her chest, legs crossed at the ankles, breathing deep and rhythmic. Someone's aunt taking a nap. Forgettable. But beneath her closed eyelids, her eyes moved with purpose. Not the random darting of dream sleep, but the controlled scanning of someone maintaining awareness even at rest. It was a skill she'd learned in Fallujah in 2004, refined in a dozen deployments across Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, perfected until it became as automatic as breathing. Resting, not sleeping. There's a difference. Lieutenant Colonel Sloan Thorne had driven 8 hours from her cabin in the Tennessee mountains to speak at the Special Operations Legacy Conference. 200 veterans and active duty personnel gathering to share lessons learned, to put faces to operations that would never be declassified, to drink coffee that tasted like memory and talk about the ones who didn't make it home. She'd arrived 3 hours early, exhausted from the drive, trying to avoid the preliminary socializing where people would ask questions she didn't want to answer. The young soldiers had pointed her to the bathroom, gestured to the couch. "Rest there if you want, ma'am. Nobody uses this place except us." Within 5 minutes she was out, or appeared to be. Specialist Garrett Briggs scrolled through his phone with the glazed expression of someone who'd spent the last 4 hours doing the same training exercise for the 3rd time that week. 22 years old, gym build but no practical strength yet, clean shaven, high and tight haircut so fresh the skin above his ears was still pale, uniform that still had crisp lines because he'd only been at Campbell for 6 months. Next to him, Private First Class Cole Whitaker was equally bored and equally young. 21. Red hair, freckles, the kind of kid who probably got carded buying beer despite being legal. He'd been filming TikTok videos on his phone. Failed attempts at comedy that would never crack 100 views. They'd been friends since basic, both assigned to Alpha Company, both trying to figure out how to be soldiers in an army that seemed to oscillate between intense training and crushing boredom with no middle ground. Garrett noticed her first. "Yo," he said, keeping his voice low, "check it out." Cole looked up from his phone, followed Garrett's gaze to the couch. "Old lady officer passed out on our couch," Garrett continued, a smile starting to form. "Bet she's some desk jockey from personnel, probably never left the Pentagon." The woman's uniform jacket was draped over the back of the couch, showing the silver oak leaves of a lieutenant colonel. But the rest of her looked decidedly unmilitary in those civilian clothes. Just another middle-aged woman who'd wandered into the wrong building. "Dude," Cole said, but there was uncertainty in his voice rather than conviction. "She's a lieutenant colonel. We'll get smoked if someone catches us." Garrett was already pulling a black Sharpie from his cargo pocket, the permanent kind that maintenance used to label equipment. "By her," he gestured at the sleeping woman. "She's like 50, probably can't even do a proper push-up. Look at her, someone's grandmother." The idea was forming even as he spoke it. Content Gold, film the sleeping officer, draw some harmless cat whiskers on her face, catch her reaction when she woke up. Maybe it goes viral. Maybe it gets him to 1 million followers. The TikTok algorithm loved this kind of thing. Authority figures getting pranked. The more senior, the better. "Just cat whiskers," Garrett said, already moving toward the couch. "Totally harmless. We'll wake her up all gentle, she'll laugh it off. Great video. What's she going to do? She's asleep. Cole hesitated, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the record button. His better judgment was fighting with his loyalty to his friend, and losing. I don't know, man. What's she going to do? Garrett repeated. She's like grandmother age, probably pulls guard duty at the museum. 3 other soldiers in the break room watched with varying expressions of concern and entertainment. Nobody moved to stop what was happening. The social contract of not being a snitch, of not ruining someone else's fun, held them in place. Garrett approached the couch, marker uncapped, grin spreading across his face. Cole hit record. The timestamp in the corner of the security camera read 14:37:18. The marker touched Sloane's left cheek. 1 second. Her eyes snapped open, not the slow flutter of someone surfacing from deep sleep, not the confusion of someone trying to remember where they are. They simply opened, already focused, already processing, pupils contracting against the fluorescent light with mechanical precision. 2 seconds. Her right hand moved, not fast in the way of panic, but fast in the way of automation, of muscle memory so deeply ingrained that conscious thought never entered the equation. The movement was pure economy. Fingers formed into a precise configuration. The grip finding Garrett's wrist with the accuracy of someone who'd performed this exact action 2,000 times before. 3 seconds. Garrett was on the floor, face down, arm twisted behind his back at an angle that wasn't quite painful but promised pain if he moved wrong. Her knee was on his spine between his shoulder blades, her weight distributed perfectly to control without crushing. The marker skittered across the linoleum, forgotten. Cole's phone captured everything. The sudden movement, the professional precision, the way Garrett went from standing to controlled in less time than it took to comprehend what was happening. Silence, complete and absolute. Then Sloane's voice, calm, almost gentle, but with an edge underneath like a blade wrapped in velvet. Son, the next time you want to touch someone while they're sleeping, you might want to make sure they're actually asleep. She released him, stood up, brushed off her jeans like nothing had happened. Garrett scrambled to his feet, face red, not from exertion but from humiliation. The other soldiers in the room had gone completely still, watching. Garrett started, then stopped. What do you say? How do you apologize for something this stupid? Sloane picked up the marker, looked at it, then looked at him, really looked at him, and what he saw in her eyes wasn't anger, it was disappointment, which was somehow worse. You saw a sleeping woman, she said quietly, middle-aged, civilian clothes, and you assumed she was harmless. You assumed she couldn't hurt you. You assumed wrong. She turned to Cole, turn off the camera. He did, immediately. You boys know who I am. They shook their heads. Lieutenant Colonel Sloane Thorne, retired, 24 years active duty, 18 of those in special operations, 8 deployments, 3 Purple Hearts. I've been shot, stabbed, blown up, and left for dead. I've killed people in combat. I've held dying soldiers in my arms. I've done things I can't talk about in countries I can't name. She paused, let that sink in. And you thought I was harmless because I'm a 48-year-old woman taking a nap. Garrett's throat was dry. Ma'am, we didn't know. Exactly. Her voice was still calm, still controlled. You didn't know. You made an assumption based on what you saw, old, female, sleeping, therefore harmless. In combat, that assumption gets you killed. She stepped closer, not threatening, just present. I'm going to ask you something, and I want an honest answer. Why did you think it was okay to draw on my face while I was sleeping? Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Because we thought it would be funny. Funny for who? Silence. Not for me, Sloane continued. For your followers, for your friends, for everyone except the person you were doing it to. That's not humor, that's humiliation. And you picked me because you thought I couldn't fight back. Cole finally spoke. "We're sorry, ma'am, we really are. It was stupid." "It was," Sloan agreed. "But stupid can be fixed. Stupid can learn. The question is, are you willing to learn?" She looked between them. These two young men who'd made a mistake, who were terrified and embarrassed and clearly understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. And she made a choice. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "You're going to sit down, all of you." She gestured to the other soldiers who'd been watching. "And I'm going to tell you a story about assumptions, about underestimation, about what happens when you judge people by what you think they can't do instead of what they can." They sat, like children called to attention, like students who knew they were about to learn something important even if they didn't know what yet. Sloane settled into a chair, crossed her legs, folded her hands in her lap, and began. "Iraq, 2004. Fallujah. I was a captain then. Combat engineer attached to a Marine unit during the second battle. My job was route clearance, finding IEDs before they found us." She paused, remembered. There was a Marine, Staff Sergeant Malcolm Strand, big guy, 6'4", 220 all muscle. He saw me on day one and decided I didn't belong, too small, too female, too weak. He told me to my face that I'd get someone killed because I couldn't handle the job. The soldiers were listening now, really listening. For 2 weeks he questioned every decision I made, undermined my authority, made jokes about sending me home to do laundry. His squad laughed. They all thought it was hilarious. Little girl playing soldier. She smiled, but there was no humor in it. Then we hit an ambush. Contact front and rear. RPGs, small arms fire, the works. Our vehicle got hit. Malcolm took shrapnel to the leg. Femoral artery nicked. He was bleeding out, and everyone was pinned down. The room was absolutely silent now. I went out there, into the kill zone, dragged him back to cover, applied a tourniquet, called for medevac, held pressure on the wound while he screamed and fought and bled, held him there for 37 minutes until the bird arrived. She looked at each of them. He lived, and when he could talk again, you know what he said to me. He said, "I'm sorry, I was wrong, you're the bravest person I've ever met." We stayed in contact after that, emails, calls. He became one of my closest friends, taught me things, learned things, respected me not because I proved I could do what men do, but because I proved assumptions are liabilities. She leaned forward. Malcolm died in Afghanistan in 2011, stepped on an IED that I would have found if I'd been there. And before he died, he wrote me a letter, said that I taught him the most important lesson of his military career, that underestimating someone doesn't just disrespect them, it makes you tactically weaker. It blinds you to reality. It gets people killed. Garrett's eyes were wet. He was trying not to show it, failing. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll remember this," Sloane replied. "Say you'll think twice before you assume someone is weak because of how they look. Say you'll judge people by their competence, not their appearance." She stood, walked to the door, turned back. "I'm speaking at the conference later. Building 12, 1800 hours. If you want to learn more about what assumptions cost us, you're welcome to attend." She left the marker on the table. When she was gone, the soldiers sat in stunned silence. Cole looked at Garrett. "Dude. I know. We almost. I know." The marker sat there between them. Black Sharpie. Permanent. A reminder of the moment they tried to humiliate someone and instead learned the most important lesson of their young military careers. That dignity doesn't always announce itself. That strength doesn't always look like muscle. That the most dangerous people in any room are often the ones you'd never suspect. And that sometimes, the greatest mercy is being taught instead of destroyed. The conference hall was packed, standing room only. Why did 200 soldiers show up to hear a retired officer talk about lessons learned? Because word spreads fast on a military base. Because the story of what happened in Building 6 Charlie had already made the rounds. Because Garrett Briggs and Cole Whitaker had done something that took more courage than pulling a prank ever did. They told the truth. They'd gone to their platoon sergeant, explained what happened, took responsibility, and when he asked them what they learned, Garrett had answered with something that surprised everyone, including himself. I learned that respect isn't given based on rank or gender or age. It's earned through competence, and I learned that I have a lot to learn. Their sergeant had looked at them for a long moment, then nodded. Get to that conference, listen, learn, and don't ever make me hear about something like this again. So they came, along with their entire platoon, along with soldiers who'd heard the story third hand and wanted to see the woman who'd put a man on the floor in 3 seconds without breaking a sweat. Sloane stood at the podium. No notes, no PowerPoint, just her and the microphone and 200 pairs of eyes watching. She didn't start with the prank. She started somewhere deeper. In 2003, I was one of 3 women in my combat engineer class. The instructors told us that statistically, women couldn't pass, that our bodies weren't built for it, that we should save everyone time and quit early. Her voice was steady, calm, but underneath it was something that made people lean forward. I graduated first in my class, not first among women, first, period. And you know what they said, that I got special treatment, that the standards must have been lowered, that it couldn't be real. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. So I deployed, and I worked twice as hard as any man to prove I deserved to be there. I carried heavier loads, pulled longer shifts, never complained, never showed weakness, because I knew that one mistake from me would be used to keep every woman after me out. The room was silent, listening. In Fallujah, I found an IED that would have killed 12 Marines. In Kandahar, I cleared a route that saved an entire convoy. In Mosul, I trained Iraqi engineers who went on to save thousands of their own people. And still, there were men who looked at me and saw a weakness, a liability, someone who didn't belong. She paused, let it breathe. But here's what I learned. Their opinion didn't matter. What mattered was the work. What mattered was being so undeniably competent that assumptions couldn't survive contact with reality. She looked directly at Garrett. He was in the 3rd row, sitting up straight, eyes locked on her. Earlier today, a young soldier made an assumption about me. He saw a middle-aged woman sleeping on a couch and decided I was harmless. Easy target, good for a laugh. The room shifted. People knew this part of the story. They leaned in to hear her version. He was wrong, but you know what? I don't blame him, because everything in his life has taught him that assumption. Media shows women as victims. Training scenarios use men as threats. Even our military culture reinforces the idea that female equals weak. She stepped away from the podium, walked to the edge of the stage. So when he approached me with that marker, he wasn't being malicious. He was being ignorant, and ignorance can be fixed. Garrett's face was red, but he didn't look away. I could have reported him, could have gotten him in serious trouble, could have made an example of him in all the wrong ways, but I asked myself, what would that teach? That women in authority will destroy you if you disrespect them. That fear is how we earn respect. She shook her head. No, that's not the lesson. The lesson is that assumptions make you tactically weaker. That underestimating someone doesn't just disrespect them, it blinds you to reality. And in combat, that gets people killed. She walked back to the podium, put her hands on it, leaned forward. I've spent 24 years proving I belong, fighting for every inch of respect. And I'm tired, not physically, emotionally. Tired of having to be perfect while men around me could be mediocre and still be taken seriously. Her voice was raw now, real. But here's the thing. I can't change the system by myself. I can't force people to see women as equals. What I can do is teach, share what I've learned. Show younger soldiers, male and female, that competence matters more than gender, that assumptions are liabilities, that the person you underestimate might be the one who saves your life. She straightened. That young soldier today, he learned. He took responsibility. He came here tonight to learn more. That takes courage, real courage, the kind that matters. She looked around the room. How many of you have made assumptions about someone based on how they looked? Be honest. Nearly every hand went up. How many of you have been underestimated? Same hands plus more. We all do it. We all suffer from it. The question is, what do we do with that knowledge? She told them about Malcolm Strand, about the Marines who doubted her until she saved their lives, about the Iraqi engineers who'd been shocked that a woman was teaching them, then became her fiercest advocates, about the soldiers she'd mentored who'd gone on to do incredible things because someone believed in their competence instead of their limitations. She talked for an hour, stories, lessons, hard truths wrapped in harder experiences. And when she finished, the room erupted in applause, not polite clapping, real appreciation, standing ovation. But Sloane was looking at Garrett, at the tears on his face, at the way he was clapping like his life depended on it. After the conference, he approached her, Cole beside him, both nervous. "Ma'am," Garrett started, voice shaking, "I don't know how to apologize enough for what I did." "You already have," Sloane said. "You told the truth. You took responsibility. You came here to learn. That's more than most people do." "I want to do more," he said. "I want to learn, really learn, not just about not being stupid, but about how to be better, how to see people for who they are, not what I assume they are." Sloane studied him, saw something in this young man, potential, genuine remorse, the capacity to grow. "Then here's what you do," she said. "You keep that marker, the one you tried to use on me. You keep it as a reminder. And every time you're about to make an assumption about someone you think about today, you think about how wrong you were, and you choose to learn instead of assume." Garrett nodded. "I will, I promise." "And one more thing," Sloane continued. "When you see someone being underestimated, you speak up. You share what you learned. You teach others. That's how we change the culture. Not through punishment, through education." Cole cleared his throat. "Ma'am, can we stay in touch? I mean, if you're willing, we'd like to learn from you." Sloane smiled, a real smile this time. "Give me your emails. I'll send you resources, reading lists, people to follow, and if you have questions, ask. I may be retired, but I'm not done teaching." They exchanged information, shook hands, and when they left, Sloane felt something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, the next generation would be better, that they would learn from mistakes instead of repeating them, that they would judge people by competence instead of assumptions. She sat in the empty conference hall, thought about Malcolm Strand, about all the soldiers who doubted her and then learned, about the ones who never learned and paid the price. And she thought about Garrett Briggs, 22 years old, stupid but willing to learn. That was enough. That was everything. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts, and sometimes teaching someone is more powerful than destroying them. 3 months later, Garrett Briggs stood in his platoon sergeant's office, holding the marker. "What's this about, specialist?" Sergeant First Class Rivera asked, looking at the black Sharpie on his desk. "I want to tell you about an idea, Sergeant," Garrett said, "for a training program." Rivera leaned back. "I'm listening." "I've been talking with Colonel Thorne, retired colonel. She's been mentoring me since I made a really stupid mistake." He told the story, all of it, the prank, the takedown, the lesson, the transformation. Rivera's expression shifted from skepticism to interest. "She's been sending me information," Garrett continued. "Studies about unconscious bias in military training, how we train soldiers to see women as victims in scenarios, how that affects real-world operations, how we're losing talent because assumptions are built into our culture." He placed a folder on the desk. Reports, research, recommendations. Colonel Thorne thinks we could do better. She thinks we could train soldiers to recognize their assumptions before they become liabilities, and she's willing to help develop the curriculum if the Army is interested. Rivera opened the folder, started reading. His eyebrows went up. This is comprehensive. She spent 24 years fighting assumptions, Sergeant. She knows how to teach people to see past them. Rivera looked at Garrett, really looked at him. 3 months ago, you were filming TikToks and pulling pranks. Now you're proposing military training reform. What happened to you, Briggs? Garrett picked up the marker, held it. I learned that I could be better, that I should be better, and that if I learned something important, I had a responsibility to share it. Rivera nodded slowly. I'll take this to the battalion commander. No promises, but it's worth a conversation. Thank you, Sergeant. As Garrett left, Rivera called after him. Briggs. Yes, Sergeant. This Colonel Thorne. She sounds like someone we need more of in the Army. She is, Sergeant. That's why I want to make sure what she taught me doesn't die with her generation. 6 months later, the pilot program launched. Unconscious bias recognition training for combat units. Developed by Lieutenant Colonel Sloan Thorne, retired, with input from active duty personnel including Specialist Garrett Briggs. The training was simple but effective. Soldiers watched scenarios, identified their assumptions, discussed how those assumptions affected tactical decisions, learned to recognize bias before it became action. Sloan flew to Fort Campbell to run the first session. Garrett was there. Cole was there. Their entire battalion was there. She started the same way she'd started every difficult conversation in her military career, with truth. I'm going to show you a video, she said. Security footage from a break room. Watch it. Then tell me what you see. The footage played, Garrett approaching the couch, the marker, the sudden movement, the takedown. When it ended, Sloan looked at the room. What assumptions were made in this video? Hands went up, answers came. That she was old and weak. That she couldn't defend herself. That rank on a jacket means someone is soft. That women in the military are administrative, not operational. Sloan nodded. All correct. Now, what could those assumptions cost in combat? The discussion that followed was real, raw, honest. Soldiers admitted their biases, shared experiences, talked about times they'd underestimated someone and paid the price, times they'd been underestimated and had to prove themselves. Women in the room spoke about constantly fighting assumptions. Men spoke about making assumptions without realizing it. Together, they started to see the problem clearly. And Sloan taught them, not with anger, not with accusation, with patience, with stories, with the hard-earned wisdom of someone who'd spent a lifetime being underestimated and had learned to turn it into strength. The program grew. Other battalions wanted it. Other bases requested it. Within a year, unconscious bias recognition training was being discussed at the Pentagon. Garrett got promoted, made sergeant, started teaching the program himself. He kept the marker in his office, showed it to every new class. This marker represents the moment I learned that assumptions are tactical liabilities, he'd say. The woman I tried to prank taught me that lesson in 3 seconds. Now I'm teaching it to you, so you don't have to learn it the hard way. Cole Whitaker became an instructor too. Together, they ran sessions across the Army, teaching soldiers to see people for their competence, not their appearance. And Sloan watched it grow. This thing that started with a stupid prank and 3 seconds of violence, this movement toward awareness, toward change. She got emails from soldiers who'd taken the training, letters from female soldiers who said they finally felt seen, messages from commanders who said their units were stronger because they'd stopped making assumptions. But the message that meant the most came 2 years after that day in the break room. It was from a young woman, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Navy SEAL candidate. Colonel Thorne, it read. I just completed Hell Week. I'm the first woman in my class to make it through. And when the instructors tried to get me to quit, I thought about your story, about Specialist Briggs and the marker, about how you spent 24 years being underestimated and used it as fuel. I used my fear, my pain, their doubt, and I made it through. Thank you for teaching us that being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's intelligence we can use. Your lessons saved me when I wanted to quit. Respectfully, LT Sarah Chen. Sloan read that email 3 times, cried on the third. Because that was legacy, not medals, not rank, not personal achievement. Legacy was teaching others to be stronger than you were, to go further than you went, to break barriers you couldn't break yourself. She responded immediately. Lieutenant Chen, congratulations. You didn't make it through because of me. You made it through because of you, but I'm honored to have played a small part in your journey. Remember this feeling, this moment. And when you're an instructor someday teaching the next generation, pass it forward. Teach them what you learned. That's how we change the world, one lesson at a time. Respectfully, Sloan Thorne. That night she sat on her porch in the Tennessee mountains, looked at the stars, thought about trajectories. 24 years of fighting, of proving herself, of being underestimated and overcoming it through sheer competence and will. And now she was teaching others to fight smarter, to recognize bias, to see people clearly. It wasn't the career she'd imagined, but it was the career that mattered. Because she'd learned something in all those years of deployment and combat and struggle. The most important battles aren't fought with weapons, they're fought with words, with patience, with the courage to teach others to be better than we were. She thought about Garrett Briggs, about how one stupid decision had led to growth, about how mercy and teaching had created more change than punishment ever could. And she thought about all the soldiers out there, male and female, fighting against assumptions every day. She couldn't save them all, but she could teach some of them, and they would teach others, and slowly, painfully, the culture would shift. Not because of one person, but because one person taught another, who taught another, who taught another. That was legacy, that was hope, that was worth every moment of struggle. The stars above Tennessee looked the same as they had in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, but she was different now. She'd learned to rest without sleeping, so others could sleep without fear. She'd learned to teach, so the lessons didn't die with her generation. She'd learned that underestimation could be a weapon, if you were smart enough to use it. And she'd learned that sometimes, 3 seconds can change everything. Not just for the person on the floor, but for everyone watching, everyone learning, everyone who comes after. But this story doesn't end there, because real change takes time. 5 years after that day in Building 6 Charlie, Sloan Thorne sat across from Colonel Delaney Blackwood in a Pentagon conference room. The lighting was harsh, fluorescent, the kind that made everyone look tired. But Blackwood didn't look tired. She looked determined. We want to expand the program, Blackwood said. Make it mandatory for all combat units, but we need someone to run it, someone with credibility, someone who's lived it. Sloan shook her head. I'm retired, Colonel. I've been out for 9 years. I'm not looking to come back. I'm not asking you to come back, Blackwood replied. I'm asking you to lead. There's a difference. She pushed a folder across the table. Inside, proposals, budget allocations, letters of support from generals, from enlisted soldiers, from women who'd taken the training and said it changed their military careers. This isn't about you wearing a uniform again, Blackwood continued. This is about you building something that outlasts both of us. A program that teaches every soldier from private to general that assumptions are tactical liabilities. Sloan opened the folder, read the first page, her breath caught. The Special Operations Unconscious Bias Recognition and Cultural Competency Initiative. Director position. Civilian oversight. Full autonomy to develop curriculum, select instructors, implement across all services. You want me to institutionalize this? Sloan asked. I want you to make it so good, so effective, so undeniable that the military can't function without it. The same way you made yourself so competent they couldn't deny you belonged. Sloan looked at Blackwood, really looked at her, saw something in her eyes, respect, trust, and something else, something personal. You were underestimated too, Sloan said. It wasn't a question. Blackwood smiled, sad, knowing. Every day of my career, I'm a black woman in special operations. I've been fighting assumptions since I enlisted. Your training program. It's the first time I've seen the institution actually try to address the problem instead of pretending it doesn't exist. She leaned forward. I can't build this alone. I need someone who understands what it's like to be underestimated, who's turned that pain into purpose, who can teach others to do the same. Sloan closed the folder, thought about her cabin in Tennessee, about quiet mornings and peaceful evenings, about the life she'd built away from the military. Then she thought about Lieutenant Sarah Chen, about Garrett Briggs, about all the soldiers out there still fighting battles that shouldn't exist. I'll do it, she said, but on one condition. Name it. We don't just teach people to recognize bias. We teach them to be better, to lead better, to build a military where competence matters more than appearance, where everyone has a fair shot to prove themselves. Blackwood extended her hand. Deal. They shook, two women who'd spent their careers being underestimated, now building something that would ensure the next generation didn't have to fight as hard. Sloan started immediately, assembled a team. Garrett Briggs was the first person she called. He was a staff sergeant now, had been running the training at Fort Campbell with results that exceeded every metric. I need you in D.C., Sloan told him. Full-time, developing curriculum, training instructors, building this into something that lasts. Garrett didn't hesitate. When do I start? Yesterday. The program grew faster than anyone expected. Within 2 years, every combat unit in the Army had received the training. The Air Force adopted it. The Navy requested a modified version for maritime operations. The Marines built it into their officer development schools. But success brought resistance. There were generals who thought it was unnecessary, soldiers who resented being told they had biases, instructors who half-heartedly taught it because they didn't believe in it. Sloan expected this. She'd spent 24 years facing resistance. She knew how to navigate it. She made the training undeniable, used data, showed how units that completed the program had better team cohesion, fewer disciplinary issues, higher retention rates among women and minorities. Brought in soldiers who'd taken the training and saw immediate improvements in their units. But more than data, she used stories, real stories from real soldiers. She brought in a male soldier who'd underestimated a female medic and almost died because he didn't trust her medical judgment. She brought in a female pilot who'd been grounded because her commander assumed women couldn't handle combat stress, only to prove herself in a crisis. She brought in soldiers of every gender, race, and background who'd been underestimated and had to fight twice as hard to be seen. And she brought in Garrett Briggs, had him tell the story of the marker, of his stupidity, of the lesson that changed his life. Every time he told it, soldiers listened, because it was real, because it was honest, because it came from someone who'd been exactly where they were and learned to be better. The resistance didn't disappear, but it diminished, slowly, steadily. And Sloan kept building, kept teaching, kept fighting for a military where competence mattered more than assumptions. Years passed, the program became standard. New soldiers didn't know a time when this training didn't exist. It became part of the culture, part of how the military operated. Sloan aged, gray hair replaced blonde, the lines on her face deepened, but her eyes stayed sharp, her voice stayed steady, and her commitment never wavered. She trained thousands of instructors, developed hundreds of scenarios, built a network of soldiers, male and female, who believed in the mission and taught it with conviction. And she watched the military change, slowly, painfully, but real. She saw more women in combat roles, more diverse leadership, more soldiers being judged by their performance instead of their appearance. It wasn't perfect. There were still problems, still bias, still assumptions that cost people opportunities. But it was better, measurably, undeniably better. And that was enough, because change doesn't happen all at once. It happens in moments, in lessons, in one person teaching another who teaches another. 12 years after she took the director position, Sloan sat in her office at the Pentagon. Garrett Briggs sat across from her. He was a lieutenant colonel now, in charge of the entire training program for the Army. "I'm retiring," Sloan said, "for real this time." Garrett's face fell. "Ma'am, we still need you." "You don't," Sloan replied gently. "You have everything you need. The program is institutionalized. The curriculum is proven. The instructors are trained. You don't need me anymore." "I'll always need you," Garrett said, voice thick. "You changed my life." Sloan smiled. "No, you changed your own life. I just gave you the tools. Now it's your job to give those tools to others." She pulled something from her desk drawer. The marker, the black Sharpie from 13 years ago. "I think this belongs to you now," she said, handing it to him. Garrett took it, held it like it was sacred. "What should I do with it?" "Keep teaching," Sloan said. "Keep the story alive. And when you retire, pass it to the next person who leads this program. Let it be a reminder that mistakes can become lessons, that assumptions can become awareness, that 3 seconds can change everything." Garrett nodded, couldn't speak. They sat in silence for a moment, two people connected by a mistake that became a movement. Finally, Garrett cleared his throat. "My daughter," he said, "Caroline, she's 15, wants to join the Army, wants to be an engineer like you were." Sloan's eyes brightened. "Smart kid. She asks about you all the time, about the stories, about what it was like being a woman in special operations, about how you dealt with being underestimated." "What do you tell her?" "I tell her the truth, that it was hard, that you had to fight for every inch of respect, but that you did it, and because you did it, it'll be easier for her." Sloan felt tears threatening, fought them back. "Tell her something else," she said. "Tell her that her father learned to admit when he was wrong, that he learned to see people for who they are, not what he assumed them to be, and that's why she'll grow up in a military that's better than the one I joined." Garrett wiped his eyes. "I will." "And tell her," Sloan continued, "that when she faces assumptions, when people doubt her, when she has to prove herself again and again, she should remember something." "What's that?" "That being underestimated isn't a weakness. It's intelligence. Use it. Let them doubt you. Then show them who you really are." They stood, shook hands, then, breaking protocol, hugged. "Thank you," Garrett said, "for everything." "Thank you," Sloan replied, "for being willing to learn. That's all any of us can do." When he left, Sloan sat alone in her office, looked at the awards on the wall, the photos, the letters from soldiers whose lives had been changed by the program. She thought about the trajectory of her life, from being underestimated in every room she entered to teaching others how to see past assumptions, from fighting alone to building a movement. It hadn't been the career she'd planned, but it was the career that mattered. Because legacy isn't what you achieve, it's what you teach others to achieve. 15 years after the marker touched her face, Sloan Thorne stood in the Army Women's Museum at Fort Gregg Adams, Virginia. The retirement ceremony had concluded an hour ago. Over 300 people attended, current and former students, soldiers whose lives had been changed by 6 weeks of training that became 15 years of cultural transformation. The marker sat in a display case, black Sharpie, permanent marker with an engraved plaque. The lesson, 2024. This marker represents the moment specialist Garrett Briggs learned that assumptions are tactical liabilities, kept by him for 15 years as a reminder of what Lieutenant Colonel Sloan Thorne taught, that underestimation can be a weapon, that respect is earned through competence, and that teaching others to be better than we were is the highest form of service. Next to it, photos. Sloan in combat gear, Afghanistan 2006. Sloan and Blackwood at a graduation ceremony. Sloan with Garrett's daughter, Caroline. Sloan with hundreds of instructors who'd completed certification. Colonel Garrett Briggs stood beside the display, retired now. His daughter Caroline stood with him, 18 years old, wearing an Army ROTC uniform, headed to West Point in the fall. "Tell them the story," Caroline said to her father, "about the marker." Garrett smiled. "You've heard it 100 times. But they haven't." She gestured at the small crowd gathered for the museum dedication. Garrett stepped forward, cleared his throat. 15 years ago, I was 22 and stupid. I tried to draw on a sleeping woman's face with this marker because I thought she was harmless. She put me on the floor in 3 seconds. Then she taught me the most important lesson of my military career. He told the story. The whole story, the prank, the takedown, the teaching, the transformation. "Colonel Thorne changed my life," he continued. "Changed how I thought about strength, about competence, about respect. She taught me that teaching others is how we honor the sacrifices of those who came before us. And she taught me that second chances are real if you're willing to do the work." Caroline stepped forward. "Colonel Thorne taught my dad. My dad taught me. And next year at West Point, I'll learn how to teach others. That's how legacy works. Not through individual achievement, but through passing knowledge forward, generation to generation." Sloan, standing in the back, felt tears on her face, didn't bother hiding them. Delaney stood beside her now. Brigadier General Delaney Blackwood, first female general officer to come from Special Operations. "We did good work," Delaney said quietly. "We did necessary work," Sloan corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "Good work makes you feel accomplished. Necessary work makes you feel complete." "I feel complete." Delaney put her arm around Sloan's shoulders. The first truly affectionate gesture in 17 years of knowing each other. "You earned that feeling, took you long enough." "I'm a slow learner," Sloan replied, "but a good teacher." The ceremony concluded. People filed past the display, reading the plaque, looking at the photos, understanding that the marker represented something larger than a single moment. As the crowd thinned, a young woman approached Sloan. Army uniform, private rank, nervous energy. "Colonel Thorne," she said, "I'm Private Harper Whitaker, Cole Whitaker's daughter." Sloan's eyes widened. Cole, the red-haired kid with the camera, who'd been there that day. "My dad said if I ever needed a mentor, I should find you. I just got selected for intelligence training, and I'm scared I'll fail, and I don't know what to do." Sloan looked at this young woman, saw the fear and determination, saw the future reaching back to the past, asking for guidance. "Come with me," Sloan said. "Let's get coffee. We'll talk about what real strength looks like." They walked out of the museum together, leaving behind the marker in its case, symbol of a moment that became a movement, of a mistake that became a lesson, of underestimation that became understanding. Outside, the Virginia sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that promised tomorrow would come, whether you were ready or not. Sloan was ready. Ready for coffee with a nervous private who needed to hear that fear was normal and failure was survivable. Ready for the next chapter, whatever that looked like. Ready for rest, finally, after 27 years of running from ghosts. Because the ghosts weren't chasing her anymore. They were walking beside her. Malcolm Strand, who died so she could live, the soldiers she couldn't save, the mistakes she'd made, the people she'd failed. They weren't burdens now. They were teachers, reminders, evidence that you could survive your failures and build something meaningful from the wreckage. She thought about the marker in its case behind her, about Garrett, who'd become a colonel because he learned to admit mistakes, about Delaney, who'd become a general because she learned forgiveness was strength, about Caroline, who'd learned to lead because her father taught her competence mattered more than assumptions, and about herself, Sloane Thorne, who'd spent half a lifetime proving she could fight, and the other half learning that teaching others not to fight was the greater victory. The evening air was cool against her face. Harper was asking about selection rates for intelligence training. Sloane was answering with the same patience she'd shown Garrett 15 years ago. Some cycles were meant to repeat, not because the world hadn't learned, but because each generation needed to learn for themselves. And the best gift you could give them wasn't the answer. It was someone willing to walk beside them while they found it. She'd learned to rest without sleeping, so others could sleep without fear. She'd learned to teach, so the lessons didn't die with her generation. She'd learned that underestimation could be a weapon, if you were smart enough to use it. And she'd learned, finally, after 6 decades of life and 3 decades of service, that legacy isn't what you achieve. It's what you teach others to achieve. The marker would sit in that museum for generations. Soldiers would read the plaque, see the photos, understand that sometimes 3 seconds can change everything. But the real legacy walked beside her now. Private Harper Whittaker, asking questions about intelligence training, about fear, about what it meant to be a woman in roles that men still questioned. And Sloane, who'd spent so long running from her past, finally understood that the past wasn't meant to be outrun. It was meant to be taught, transformed from scars into shields for the next generation, from failures into lessons, from 3 seconds of violence into 15 years of education, from one marker into thousands of soldiers who understood that respect is earned through competence, that assumptions are tactical liabilities, and that the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with the courage to teach others to be better than we were. They don't make legends, Sloane thought, walking into the Virginia evening with a nervous private who needed to hear that she could succeed. They teach them. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.